Hey guys, my name is Will, and in this video I wanted to show all of you my collection of swords. And at the very end, I'm going to tell you what the absolute #1 all-around best sword in the world is. Ready? Alright, so to get started, we're going to look at what's called a Celtic anthropomorphic sword. The Celtic people, whoever was using this at the time, which would have been the Celtic people, would have just called this a sword. We have classified it as the Celtic anthropomorphic sword because of the way the guard is built. If you look at it, it looks like a little person. He has a head, arms, and legs. The handle is his body, and then the blade is the blade. This particular historical reproduction sword comes from a point in history that is much older than my other swords. This is the oldest sword that I own. You can look at the size of the blade. It's very leaf shaped. This one typically would have been fought with one hand. You'd have a shield or something in your other hand, and you're free to do all kinds of cool, ninja stabby maneuvers, stuff like that. But looking at it this way, you see one of the blade shapes, and then looking at it this way, you actually see a very thick blade profile. The reason for that is metallurgy practices at the time weren't as advanced to produce lighter and thinner blades of a similar strength. And so the way they compensated for that was by making a thick blade. This particular blade is definitely more inclined to cut or hack and whatever you want to call this type of movement, as opposed to thrusting. Even though obviously it's a sword, it can thrust. It's definitely leaning towards hacking and slashing. So let's show a quick demonstration of that, and then we'll move on to sword number 2. So this is a super nifty, advanced cutting medium called El Carbordo box. I don't know. And basically I'm just going to show a cut or two on the box. So you can see that right there, I think. You can see the big gash opened up in it. Obviously, it's got a pretty good chop, but because it is such a wide, thick blade, it has a hard time penetrating things that give resistance. As stated earlier, it can obviously thrust. And so that is the Celtic anthropomorphic sword. All right, so the next sword we're gonna look at is a German Messer. Messer is literally just the German word for knife. People who use this sword would have just called it knife or Messer. This particular one has a knuckle bow style crossguard with a clamshell, well, maybe that's called the knuckle bow, I don't know. But it has the clamshell guard to cover the back end of the knuckles. This one historically came from a much later period than the previous sword, and as such, you can see is honestly a remarkably thin, yeah, look at that right there, blade profile. It has only one cutting edge, as opposed to the Celtic sword before, which had 2 cutting edges. This edge is completely dull, so it's very safe to do that. This edge is completely sharp and is not safe to do that. It is remarkably light, quick, agile. You can cut, you can thrust, all these different things. Honestly, out of my entire sword collection, this little guy is like top 3. I got it remarkably cheap on a deal, and it's just amazing at its cutting potential. I'll go ahead and show you a demonstration of that right now. So this is just a little water bottle. The edge on this one is remarkably sharp. The blade profile is very thin. It does a great job of slicing through these bad boys. Boom. Got a little wrapper on the end of it there. Let's do one more test cut off of the stand here, and then we'll move on to sword number 3. Don't blink or you'll miss it. Well, that was a great cut. Okay, so I goofed. So a super itty bitty insert quick thing right here. I forgot to tell you the blade length measurements for the previous 2 swords. My Celtic sword is about 23 inches, or I think that's 58.4 centimeters is what I got from the converter. The Messer is 21 3/4 inches, which is 55.2 centimeters. So I'm gonna try to include that information as we move forward, just so that you guys can have it as we look at this one. Okay, so every single person who has seen swords inside of a shopping mall in the United States knows what this sword is, or should know what this sword is. This is a katana. It comes from the country of Japan. It was used, honestly, for like their entire medieval history. And so it's hard to place on a timeline where this sword would have been used because it was used over such a large breadth of time. Before I forget, the blade length is about 29.5 inches, which converts to 75 centimeters. This blade is also single-edged. It has a remarkably sharp edge, but the blade profile is pretty thick. It's not particularly thin. You can especially get a good sense of that by looking at the back edge here, the blunt edge. The cross guard is distinct, very, very distinct for a Japanese sword. It's called a disc guard, I believe, with the brass the guard's a suba, the brass, I don't remember. I'm sorry, guys. Y'all are going to crucify me in the comments. But it's a katana. It's super cool. I love it. This is actually the very first sword, the very first battle-ready sword that I bought. And it has been with me for over a decade now. Lots of attachment to the sword. It's a lot of fun to use. It feels very light in the hand. It's obviously very predisposed to cutting, having such a large curve and being single-edged, but as with any sword, it can thrust. Let's do a quick cutting demonstration on a Brave water bottle, and we'll move on to the next sword. Unfortunately, these little water bottles tend to rip sometimes, so that's the cut on that. All right, this is my next sword. I believe the name is pronounced Didao. It comes from China. Didao, I believe, translates into war sword. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But it looks super dope. I love it. This is a pretty recent purchase that I have. It feels, honestly, it feels like if an axe was a sword. Because of the relatively short blade length, which is only, let's see, I have it written down, 22.5 inches, which, if you remember, is shorter blade length than the Celtic sword, which was a one-handed sword. This one being a two-handed sword, you know, has a relatively short blade length but a very long handle. You're able to deliver huge, powerful cuts when you crank down and have that leverage moment. It honestly feels like you're swinging an axe with a super long blade. The blade profile is a bit thinner than the katana. Again, this is another one-edged sword. I believe that the hole at the top here, which you can see, I don't know if it has a particular functional purpose, but was rather done to showcase the smith's skill at being able to drift a hole into that. I don't know the purpose of the ring handles, but I do know that it is very historically accurate for swords of the period and of the region. This particular one, I redid the wrap with some athletic tape because the other wrap was just kind of bad and falling off. Obviously, athletic tape is, you know, phenomenal and super historically accurate, right? But it's what I had to work with. This one, because of its shape, size, weight, and blade profile, really does not do a good job against water bottles. It just kind of blows them apart. It really excels, however, against targets that have some stiffness to them or that are able to hold their own shape. So like really big water jugs, or when there are bundles of water bottles, it has done well. But I have a super cool advanced cardboard box that I'm going to chop into. So let's get started with that. All right, and we're back for the cutting test. Please excuse me on that one. My phone storage ran out in the middle of recording, which is super great and cool. So here is chop test with the Didao. As you can see, it's a bit harder to get through, you know, material that'll collapse in on itself, but because of the exceptional sharpness of the edge, still able to penetrate a good ways. We'll go again. Let's see if I can get a good little angle. That one will work. And so that one, I wasn't trying to bust through the edge, I was just trying to chop into the meat, and you can really see how much I was able to cleave into it right there. Even a sword like this with such a tip that is very clearly designed to cut, not thrust into the target, can still thrust into it. Swords are swords, man. They're gonna do what swords do. With that though, I mean, obviously if you ask anyone, this is a cutting weapon. Let's see if we can get another good. Yep, that was a good one. So that was kind of a little bit of a windmill shot, but you can see it really opened up the cardboard there. You know, swords are doing what they're supposed to do. They do an exceptional job of it. Next, sword. All right, this next sword is a European longsword. There are so many different types of longsword. It's really hard to pinpoint, you know, hard and fast truths of like, oh, if it doesn't have this, then it's not a longsword. There's longswords that are made for cutting, like this one is. You can see with the width of the blade. There's longswords that are made only purely, or I say only purely. There are longswords that are made majoritively for thrusting to get through gaps in armor. Out of my entire collection, this sword is not the lightest of my swords, but it is by far the most nimble. Look at the point control I can have on it. Just with one hand, you know, very, very casually holding it, not exerting a lot of force. The reason for that is the point of balance is almost exactly on the hilt because it has such a wide base. The blade has such a wide base. It pulls the weight of the sword back into the hand, and it allows for really quick movements. And I absolutely love just zipping this around. It is so cool. It's a ton of fun of a sword to have. I got it about a year ago. Just 10 out of 10, couldn't be happier with it. This one does pretty well against water bottles, so let's give a water bottle a little chop test. So we're gonna do a little special maneuver on this one. I'm gonna start here, whipping the sword around to cut with the back edge of the sword. I'm sure that there's a name for this move. Honestly, I don't know it. I've seen other people do it, and so I've tried to emulate that. And here we go. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Look at that. Look at that. The long sword. Next one. Let's go. And my dudes, next up on the line is this sword. It is, you may recognize the shape. It's a good bit bigger than the other one of this style, but it is another Messer, another German sword. This particular one is called a gross Messer, which translates to, so Messer meant knife, correct? Gross means large. Guess what gross Messer means? Large knife. That is quite literally what the people that use this would have called it. Similar swords would be like a Kriegsmesser, which translates to war knife. Obviously, you can see it is a beast of a sword. It's quite large. This is the heaviest sword that I own. The blade length is 31 inches and 3/4, or about 80 centimeters. For the long sword previously, I think I just remembered that I forgot to give you the length on that one. It's just a little bit shorter than this at 30 inches and 30 3/4 inches, or 78 centimeters. This one is a good deal heavier. The point of balance is far further forward. I have to exert much more force to hold the tip still. This one is not double-edged. It has a blunt edge on the back. Really good blade profile for a single-edged sword, and it is an absolute beauty to cut and chop with. It feels great moving. It has a wonderful weight to it, and so I'll show you how it does going into a cardboard box. You guessed it. All right, here we go. Kind of difficult to get into the top of these. They just crumble away. I don't know why I keep cutting at the top of them. I'm gonna cut at something that actually show you how it cuts. Let's go again. That was a pretty good one. You can see I busted through at the top here, sliced all the way down through that into the edge right there. I'll show you a little thrusting capability. Obviously, swords thrust really well. This one has a great edge to it. Let's do one more big chop with this sword, just because I like it. Let's see if I can get through the top here. No, just crumpled it. Well, I did a little bit of a cut. All right, Mainly I just messed the box up. All right, run out of time. We got another sword to go. Let's do it. Right up here is the largest sword that I own with a blade length of over 40 inches, which translates to about 102, 103 centimeters. It is, can you guess? So a lot of people call this the Scottish Claymore. And so that's honestly what I'm going to refer to it as because it is so iconic. Some people call it the William Wallace sword because it is the sword that Mel Gibson uses in the movie Braveheart when he portrays William Wallace. The people that would have used this would have just called this a sword, you know, a large sword. There's some information that suggests this type of sword would not have been called a claymore, but rather what we refer to as a Scottish basket-hilted sword is what would be called a claymore. But I grew up calling this a claymore. You guys are going to call this a claymore. It's a claymore, all right? It is a beast to wield. Obviously, it is very tip-heavy, having such a long blade, but I absolutely love being able to have the amount of control, the control of the area with it. It is a lot of fun to practice with. You can do some half sorting techniques by reaching up on the guard, or excuse me, on the blade where I have a leather guard placed. Let's go ahead and do a cut test with it. That's what we're all about, right? A little cardboard box action. It's been well used, but let's see if I can just do a little swipe right through it. That was bad. That was dumb. Well, as a sword, it stabs really easily. This one's a beautiful stabber. Getting right in there, passing in and out. Let's do a chop test that we can actually see. Ah, come on. No! There we go. That one finally got through. These boxes just deform. They don't hold their shape, and swords that don't have an ultra fine edge have a really difficult time cutting through them. This sword is not supposed to have a very fine edge. It's not supposed to cut incredibly thin material. Historically, this would have been deployed against horses, against cavalry. I guarantee you it has enough cutting power to sweep through legs of oncoming cavalry. This is an absolute beauty of a weapon, and it's one of my all-time favorites. But I have saved the absolute best sword for last. Let me go get it. Okay, so my last sword that I have to show you is by far and away the best cutter, the best stabbing sword, the best sword to use against armor or against unarmored opponents. It is the best sword used across all of history in not only battlefield scenarios, but also in personal carry situations where you have constraints of concealability, as well as needing to have, you know, good long reach and things like that. High mobility, it's low weight, it's got a great center of balance. All of these things tie together, and you know, maybe you're thinking, what sword could this be? Well, the answer's gonna hit you on the head. You're gonna feel like a dummy when I show it to you, because it is obviously the lightsaber. No other sword has the amount of speed, dexterity, and cutting power that a lightsaber has. It is by far the best sword in all of recorded history, and it is so good that it is used countless times across movies. Oftentimes when they make like historical movies, they will actually use lightsabers and just have to like green screen swords over it. Have you ever seen in a movie where someone, bam, gets hit with the sword and they just die instantly? Well, that's because it's actually a lightsaber. Real swords don't do that. You have to cut vital things, or you have to stab important pieces of the body to get them to stop working. Lightsabers, boom, one touch, you're dead. I'm actually too scared to cut anything with this particular lightsaber because I'm worried that it would be so devastating, my yard just may not, you know, take it anymore. So all we're gonna do is flip it around and look super cool while doing it. Thank you guys for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would appreciate it even more if you like it, subscribe to the channel, and just help me out in any way that you can. Hope you guys had a good time. Bye.